Guess what? There's more than one adaptation of this story. And for all you folks who have been waiting weeks and weeks and weeks for Follow the Yellow Brick Road, you're in the wrong story. That was from The Wiz, a 1978 film inspired by a Broadway musical which was based on the Wonderful Wizard of Oz. It starred Diana Ross as Dorothy, Michael Jackson. I couldn't do that in the 80s. I know I can't do that now, but Michael Jackson as the Scarecrow, comedian Nipsey Russell as the Tin Man, Ted Ross as the Lion, Mabel King as the Wicked Witch of the West, and believe it or not, Richard Pryor as the would-be wizard. Boy, that's got to be an interesting retelling of the Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Now, everybody's going to run home to see if they can find this movie, but I trust me, it's a little different, so you better be ready, because we are so used to 1939. When we see Glinda and the Munchkins get Dorothy onto her journey along the yellow brick road. However, The Wiz used an element from the original story that Dorothy and eventually her three companions actually had to find the road before they started the journey. Interesting. Of the Yellow Brick Road, it's one of those central elements in the story and in the book, The Wizard of Oz. You might even say it's even a character, as Dorothy, the Scarecrow, and the Tin Man and the Witches are. Because even in our modern day movie, Wicked, they pay homage to the Yellow Brick Road, as they show it being designed and built and even trying to pick the color. You see, from the moment I started this series, people have been looking for the Yellow Brick Road. Some magic path that leads me through life, and that if I just stay on it, everything will be rainbows and sunshine. Unfortunately, as we've learned through Job, it doesn't exactly exist the way that I think it does. That's because the play's the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. No, that is not a quote from the Bible, and it's not a quote from The Wizard of Oz. It's a quote from Mr. William Shakespeare. And I wanted to start here because we need to understand that plays are usually divided into acts and scenes. And, sorry, a little trigger happy there. Acts and scenes. And the play has characters that are portrayed by a cast. And among those characters is usually a protagonist, which is the main character. And then we have the antagonist, which is usually somebody working against the protagonist, or they're kind of in the way. And as we've been looking at the book of Satan, of Job, Satan is the protagonist in our story. However, spoiler alert, the name of the protagonist is not Job. The book is named for him, but the battle that we've been watching is not between Job and Satan, which is often how we tell this story, right? Satan ruined Job's life, but that's not how it happened. The idea here is, nor is the conflict between Job and God. And again, that's a path that we often take because God ruined Job's life, right? I mean, if God had just kept that hedge around him, none of this would have happened. But the thing we need to remember is that in this story, Satan is the antagonist, but God is actually the protagonist. God is not a side character in Job's life. And if we tell that story, we end up in the wrong place. So about the play, there's this idea of characters, and there's this idea of acts, and there's the idea of scenes, but there is also the idea of plot. I mean, if you're going to have a play, you got to have a story, right? So, spoiler alert number 2, the plot is not suffering. And it's not easy come, easy go, which is kind of what we saw Job in his attitude a little earlier in our story. And while it's important sub-themes, the plot is not patience and perseverance. James chapter 5, verses 10 through 11 says, "Brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance, and you have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy." It is true that Job had to be patient during his inexplicable and unearned suffering. Yet Job had to persevere through his suffering. He just couldn't curse God and die. And while patience and perseverance are very important bricks on our yellow brick road, they're not the road. James tells us that the Lord had brought Job through this through his compassion and mercy. So just understand, in the story, Job did not just tough it out. I'm going to be tough and I'm going to endure all of this suffering and endure all these things. He didn't just make a tough decision. At the end of this, Job's going to have to embrace his God for who God really is. And that's important for us. So back to the play. So we've got to have some acts and some scenes, and we've got to have some characters, and we've got to have some plot. But you also understand that in a play, there are various forms of speech in a play. There's the idea of narration, which is just to provide some spoken commentary, usually by somebody either off to the side or off scenes. There is the idea of dialogue, which is content which is spoken between two characters, or it could be, and it should be between the character and somebody out in the audience. There is the idea of monologue, which are these really long, drawn-out speeches in the middle of a play. And if you've been reading through the book of Job and you're keeping up with us, then guess what? Much of Job is written in monologue form, because some of those speeches go on for chapter after chapter, and you just want to say, can you just get to the point? They were doing monologues. And there's one more form of speech that's important in a play. It's called a soliloquy. It's the act of speaking one's thoughts out loud with oneself, regardless of any hearers, especially the characters in the play. So in modern day movies, when they're going to have one of these soliloquies spoken, we see them much different now. So you get the thing where the action continues on the screen, and then in the background you can hear the character talking about what's happening or what has happened or what they're thinking about what's happening. And so the movie continues to play, and the voice behind is just kind of there. But we're talking about a play here. That's kind of hard to do. So often what happens in these moments of soliloquy, these deep thoughts, is the entire performance just freezes. Better than I got the projector to freeze this morning. I kept pushing the button and it refused to freeze. It just kept on moving. But the entire thing freezes. And then the character that's going to speak steps out and delivers his speech. Then he returns to his spot, and the action continues. And you're probably sitting there thinking, you know what, I never really thought I was going to have to take a theater class to come to church. When you're talking about the book of Job, since it is written in the format of a play, then you need to understand what you're looking at. And so today, we're actually going to look at the one soliloquy in all of the book. It's in chapter 28 of the book of Job. So if you have your Bible, if you want to grab one from the pew rack in front of you and turn that way, we're going to be in the chapter 28, and we're going to be talking about the path of life. And it's one of those things that we have to appreciate, because when we begin to read chapter 28, we're not exactly sure who's talking. Now remember, none of us have actually seen this play. I'm assuming nobody here is that old, right? Nobody here I didn't think so. So you've never actually seen this play. So what we've got is the script, or the way it was put out there, the performance of it. And so it never tells us, well, this is God speaking, or this is this person speaking. But most people kind of think this is Job talking. The reason they're thinking it's Job, because Job is the last one to speak at the end of 27 and the first one to speak at the beginning of 29. And so it sounds like this may be the moment when he steps out and he's sharing his thoughts on how things are going. I'm going to go with a hunch that Satan didn't deliver this speech. It wouldn't make any sense, right? This isn't his story. Some do give credit to God speaking. So imagine how this would look. This would have been like maybe the stage was done in two platforms and God and Satan are up here because they're behind the scenes and all the action is happening down here. And so maybe God, who would have been portrayed behind a curtain because of the respect for God the Jews had, maybe God is speaking. I'm okay with that. Still others credit it to a narrator. I honestly don't think it was a narrator because that wouldn't make this a soliloquy. It would make it narration and kind of puts it out of our story. But when we begin to look at chapter 28, it allows us to go back and talk about authorship. Who wrote the book of Job? And that's kind of unknown. However, if you begin to read through chapter 28 of this story, you're going to start noticing, it seems I've seen this writing style somewhere before. It looks very much like the book of Ecclesiastes. And we know that these similarities, it does, especially during the conclusion there where it says to fear the Lord, that the wisdom, and fear the Lord, that wisdom, and to shun evil. That's kind of a Solomon theme that he puts out there, remember? Fear the Lord and keep his commands. So the similarities, when we begin to read this, especially in this particular chapter, it does sort of suggest that while Job may have lived a long, long, long time ago, maybe all the way back to the time of Abraham, the story may have been written sometime around the time of Solomon, or even by Solomon. And that would have made perfectly good sense because if you've ever read the book of Ecclesiastes, you know Solomon was a lover of the arts. So as we begin to pull at this path of life, we're going to see that it isn't just one path. In fact, it starts out with the highway of man. So I'm not going to read all 12 verses, you're welcome, but I am going to kind of give you the big point behind those first 12 verses. I am in chapter 28, verses 10 to 11. It says, they being men, tunnel through rock, their eyes see all the treasures. They search the sources and the rivers and bring hidden things to light. And so the idea here is when we talk about this path of man, it's all about mining. He's throwing out this idea of, I want you to get the picture of people mining. And they have a quest. They have a quest for precious metals, silver, gold, iron, and copper. The speaker mentions the building of shafts through intense digging. And what he's after here is something that each of us struggle with. See, the first section speaks about man's relentless desire to acquire. Now, let me put that in some smaller terms. It is about, I want something. How do I get it? Right? We all have those moments. Although there's something inside of us that just makes us kind of obsess over the things that we want. It makes us kind of want them so bad that we can't get them out of our head. We keep thinking, I want a pony, or I want a dog, or I want a toy, or I want this, or if you're an adult, I want a new car, I want a new job. We begin to think them over and over and over in our head. And again, this is a very Solomon theme. Even when we get to the point of heaven, when I talk about heaven, what do I usually start talking about? We think about streets made of gold, a sea of crystals, and wondering what kind of fish lives in that sea, gates made of pearls, a rainbow full of promises, and all those things that seem to be precious to me. And oh yeah, by the way, heaven is where God lives. Isn't that how we kind of do this a lot of times? We think about all the stuff I'm going to get when I get to heaven and how I'm going to get my mansion, or I'm going to get my cloud, or I'm going to get my wings, I'm going to get my harp, all those things that I get. Oh yeah, I guess somewhere along the way I'm going to get to meet God. That's heaven. And our acquiring goes just beyond the things that are tangible, because even when we think about the Bible, it's all about knowledge, right? I want to know more. We treat it like a user's manual, maybe a treasure map. And really what it was supposed to be was a compass. When you read the Bible, you're not just looking for information to answer a trivia question. It's not some kind of a scavenger hunt to see if you can find this, that, or the other. When you read the Bible, what you're supposed to be able to see is this is the way to find God. See, the reality thing comes into the fact that in our efforts, in our successes, I'm never satisfied. I'm still chasing the wind because really what my heart wants is this thing that we call wisdom and understanding. Verse 12 of chapter 28 reads, "But where can wisdom be found? Where does understanding dwell?" From a Wizard of Oz perspective, there is irony here because the wizard has no power. Everything he's doing is done through deception, trickery, maybe a little lying, all cloaked in this shell of technology. And I'm going to put on a good show for everybody so that you'll think I am a wizard. But you understand that irony also extends to us when we begin to talk about the Bible. Because from a biblical standpoint, that tree all the way back in the Garden of Eden, we remember that tree, right? Oh man, that tree, God should have never created that tree, right? That tree that we all talk about, it's called the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And we know the story. Satan convinced humanity that eating the tree would make them like God, having true wisdom. However, the moment that they ate, it separated us from God, costing us our connection to true wisdom. That's the twist. And the thing is, all of the technological advances we've had over the years, they've allowed us to gather a whole lot of things, including we're a lot smarter. We know a lot more about our universe. We know a lot more about our planet. We know a lot more about math and science. But wisdom and true understanding seems to be just out of our grasps. Here's our twist, folks. We, humanity, can bring physical light into the darkness on our planet. Even some of the most darkest places, we can figure out, let there be light, right? However, when it comes to my soul, that part of me that is down deep inside of me, that part of me that is always seeming to miss something, I just can't seem to enlighten it. These are the words of Job in chapter 12, verses 22 through 25. He being God, reveals the deep things of darkness and brings utter darkness into the light. He makes nations great and destroys them. He enlarges nations and disperses them. He deprives the leaders of the earth of their reason. Yeah, I know a few of those. He makes them wander in a trackless waste. They grope in darkness with no light. He makes them stagger like drunkards. Welcome to the road of man. Because that road is a road of lost wisdom. The writer is now going to turn his attention to the value of wisdom. So I'm not going to read all the verses, but this is verses 13 through 22. And this is what he tells us. This first glance, it's the rarest of all commodities. Man, if you had true wisdom and you put it on eBay, that would be the rarest thing out there. No mortal can actually comprehend its worth. I mean, I can evaluate how much my house is worth, how much my cars are worth. I can even evaluate how much my kids are worth. But you know what? This idea of wisdom, my head can't go that far. It cannot be found in the land of the living. So guess what? I'm not the only one that has struggled. If I went and asked you, You're in the land of the living. Odds are you're trying to figure this out just like me. The deep says, it's not in me. And the sea says, it's not in me. When it comes to wisdom, it's not in the land, it's not in the sea. It comes only from God. Never from me. Because this thing that we call wisdom, it's priceless. More valuable than any amount of gold or silver, according to chapter 28. It cannot be bought with the finest gold, nor can its price be weighed out in silver. For those of you who like your jewelry, it is more precious than fine gemstones, onyx, lapis, crystal, jewels, coral, jasper, rubies, or topaz. Now think about this for a second. If this is Job speaking, chapter 28 makes so much more sense. Look at where this man is. His kids are dead. His wife is having a nervous breakdown from depression. His wealth is all gone. His health is failing. And his friends are blaming him for everything that's gone wrong. And God is absolutely silent. He hasn't heard a word from God. He didn't even get to participate in the beginning scene when he was out there and we were talking about, here's God, here's Satan, have you considered? Job didn't get any of that information. And the funny thing is, he's not wishing to have it all back. But now he wants to know, why, God? Give me some understanding. Verses 20 and 22 through 22 says, where does wisdom come from? Where does understanding dwell? Is it hidden? It is hidden from the eyes of every living thing, concealed from the birds in the sky. Destruction and death say, only rumor of it has reached our ears. I like Job because when he speaks, he likes to ask questions. And last week we listened to some rhetorical questions, those things he didn't really want answered. But here, these are not rhetorical. On this journey of suffering, he can't just seem to find his yellow brick road. So when I started this particular sermon series, this was not here. As a matter of fact, all that was here were these black sheets that were forming somewhat of a road. And I got lots of people that try to remind me that in The Wizard of Oz, the road is made of yellow bricks, Barry. But you understand, there are two roads. The first road that I laid down is from man. And you know where it leads? Nowhere. I can go over here and I can talk to these guys and they can give me information. And then I can run back over here and I can talk to the witch and I can peek in the house and I can look. And so then I can run back over here and I can ask these guys. And it leads me nowhere. I just keep going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Because the road of man doesn't lead me anywhere. And like the famous road of Oz, though, we need another path. It's called the Yellow Brick Road. But that road doesn't lead to a place. It leads to a person. It leads to the way of God. Verses 23 through 28 says, God understands the way to it, and he alone knows where it dwells. For he views the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. When he establishes the force of the wind and then measures out the waters, when he made a decree for the rain and the path for the thunderstorms, then he looked at wisdom and appraised it. He confirmed it. He tested it. And he said to the human race, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. And to shun evil is understanding. Job is trying to get off of this endless loop path between humanity. He's looking for the way of God. And the first thing he has to do is acknowledge God's in control of everything, even if he does not understand it. And trust me, God's going to show up in a few weeks, and Job's going to get an earful. He says that when it comes to wisdom, only God can appraise it. How much value does it have? Only God can confirm it. And only God can test it. I can't go to these guys. They had nothing for me. I can't go to her. They had nothing for me. Because only God can solve these things. As a human, the best I can do is to seek to serve God, seek to serve and follow God. Verse 28, as he said to the human race, not to women, not to men, not to some race that was out there as far as an ethnicity background. The human race. Therefore, if you are here today and you are human, this is what the Lord says. The fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. And to shun evil is understanding. And as a human, I find that very frustrating. That's it? 28 chapters? And that's what you got for me, Job? Fear God and keep his commandments? That's it? Surely you've got to have learned something else on all of this journey of suffering. I mean, during suffering, patience and persevere. That's not what I want to hear. And that's okay, because that's not the point of suffering. The point of all of this begins, maybe the psalmist understood it. Psalms 138, verses 6 through 12. The Lord works righteousness and justice for all the oppressed. He made known the ways to Moses, his deeds to the people of Israel. The Lord is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love. He will not always accuse, nor will he harbor anger forever. He does not treat us as our sins deserve or repay us according to our iniquities. I sure am glad that one's in there. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him. And as far as the east is from the west, are two wicked witches. As far as they are apart, so far he has removed our transgressions from us. I take comfort in that, folks. I am never going to understand man's suffering. And I did not promise you an explanation at the beginning of this sermon series that I was going to help you understand suffering. But this road right here, I can understand. This road that does not lead me out of suffering, but you notice it intertwines right with our suffering. This road is the road that we need to understand. It is not the suffering of man, but here's our words, the sovereignty of God. Job said it. God's in control of all of it. Only he can test it. Only he can appraise it. Only he can confirm it. The only question that we have to answer for ourselves, and you have to answer this for you, is which path are you going to travel? I've given you two choices. You can travel this one that will take you back and forth and back and forth and back and forth until you are sick to your stomach, trying to find answers to why life is the way it is. You can ask all the people and listen to all the opinions and all of the complaints, and you know what? It's a never-ending path. You can choose that road, and God will let you do it. Or you can tune in for the next few weeks as we begin to talk about the road of sovereignty. How do I get off of this path of suffering and understand suffering will still happen, but how do I get on this path that leads me toward God? But it all starts with a decision. Job had to get out of his head. He had to get into his own thought process with God, not just about himself, not just, oh, woe is me, why is this happening? God, where are you? And the moment Job asked that, guess what happened? God showed up. And that's where we're going to stop.